Hello and fresh sunny greetings to all. As you guess now, I am going to talk a bit about the upcoming research project. So my plans about this project are still the same, investigating the use of similes in popular science articles. Speaking about the importance of this topic, first of all, it's necessary to mention that, as we guess, all popular science texts, including popular science articles, they are intended for the general public, and this means that their potential readers are people of different age, coming from different social groups, having different occupations, and usually their professional lives are not associated with the topic of those texts. But at the same time, they're authors, they're experts in some particular fields of studies, or in many cases, especially in the case of articles, these are science journalists who report on some scientific research in their texts. So that's why it's logical to assume that the main purpose of the authors of such texts is to convey the necessary factual or scientific information in a more accessible and in a more interesting way. And of course, they can't but use some linguistic or stylistic devices to be able to achieve these purposes. So according to literature, popular science texts, they are characterized by the frequent use of different tropes, for example, metaphors, personifications, exaggerations, allegories, similes, hyperboles, and so on, because on the one hand, they let them convey the elements of some factual information, but on the other hand, they also let them produce some pragmatic effect, for example, influence the readers or the listeners' evaluations, or maybe also impose some opinion on them, or just convincing them about the fact that the author's opinions are well justified, or maybe persuading the readers to do something, and so on. And as it's shown in some previous research, similes typically include different stylistic devices within themselves, for example, scientific terms, or especially colloquialisms, slang, jargon, of course, stylistically neutral vocabulary, or evaluative adjectives, and so on. And it's clear that the kinds of words which are used in them, they can't but influence the pragmatic and communicative purposes, for example, where they're intended mostly to show the author's evaluations regarding the subject of his or her text, or for instance, maybe to appeal to the reader's or listener's background knowledge, to be able to convey the necessary ideas in a clear and more accessible way, and so on. So these facts, they point to the multifunctionality of similes in different contexts, including different genres, different kinds of texts, and so on. And that's why it would be probably quite reasonable to investigate different roles and different functions which similes may play in particular genres of popular science texts, or even some varieties of those genres. So as you guess, in this case, I'm going to concentrate on the language of popular science articles, particularly on the use of similes. So if you look at the metadata accompanying the corpus which I constructed for this study, it includes two subcorpora. In the first of them, there are other articles from National Geographic, and in the second one from Discover. This choice was not accidental. For example, if you look at their websites, like first of all, let's look at the website of National Geographic. We will be able to infer from the information, for instance, in one of its press releases, that the materials which are published in this magazine, they are intended for very broad audiences, including many people who may be initially not interested in reading the text about science, or those who don't have much experience in terms of reading about science, or in terms of doing anything connected with science. So initially they may be interested, for example, in reading something about politics, so they may be more motivating in becoming familiar with such topics as economics or history and so on, because the materials dedicated to all these topics, they are extensively published in National Geographic. So that's why the authors, they may have this additional purpose of hooking the reader's attention from the very beginning and maintaining the interest throughout the whole author's narration. And at the same time, if you look at the website of Discover, And especially at this media guide, we will be able to infer from the information which is provided there that this magazine is mostly intended for those people who already have some experience regarding science, including reading scientific materials, maybe even making some simple scientific experiments, and also perhaps having some experience of communication with scientists and so on. And that's why it's clear that maybe the authors are not interested in attracting their attention so much, but first of all, in explaining something in a more accessible and a clearer way, because these are still lay readers, so they're not specialists in the subject of those articles. And that's why these specific purposes, they certainly should influence the use of similes or many other linguistic and stylistic devices. So in this case, as it can be seen from this metadata, is the main variable, which I'm going to consider in this project. So the subject of the articles is the same, ocean life research, but the difference is that they are published in different magazines. So it will be interesting to see in what ways this different source of publication may influence the frequency, the functions, or perhaps some other parameters of using similes in this genre. And also, if you take a further look at the components of this subcorpora, we will notice that there is some difference, first of all, in the number of articles. So in the first one, there are 23 articles, and in the second one, 16. But at the same time, if we pay attention to the size of these subcorpora, we will see that the first of them contains 26,166 words, and the second one 26,302 words. So that's why it was a kind of achieving compromise between the number of these articles and the size of these subcorpora. Speaking about this table, it includes only the general metadata about this corpus. Among those things which I haven't mentioned yet, these are the websites of the magazines, as well as some possible applications of both subcorpora. For example, the initial purpose of the corpus in general, like investigating the use of simile in the text of popular science articles, as we already know, and also mentioning some other possible applications of this corpus, particularly exploring the use of some other linguistic or stylistic devices, for example, evaluative lexical units, metaphors, idioms, scientific terms, and so on. And as for all other contextual information, which can be important for this study to this or that extent, I included this into the files with the subcorpora themselves. So if you look at these files, we will see that they include, of course, the title of the subcorpora, and I made sure that it's possible to see the name of the magazine where these articles are taken from, and it refers both to the name of these files and to the title of the subcorpora themselves. And the same also in the second one, as we can see it here. Yeah. But these files, they also include the date of the issue where these articles were published. So this information is provided for each article, like for example, in this case, May 2005, or in some other case, it will be August 2008, and so on. So I made sure that in most cases, these articles are published in different issues of the same magazines. And also this data includes some information about, for example, the name of the authors, and especially about the website where these articles were originally taken from, because this should let me find out what exactly was written in those articles, how they were designed, and some other parameters if it's necessary, because I may not be able to see it in these files. And I use some coloring to differentiate such things as the titles of these articles, some words which precede the main text, and also put each article on a separate page so that it could be easier to navigate within this subcorpora. But at the same time, I decided not to put each article into a separate file, first of all because I don't intend it to be used by anybody else, at least in the nearest future, and I'm currently using it for this project and probably will use at least some of those articles for some further research projects. So that's why now I have all the necessary contextual information at my disposal. But it's clear that if I decide to put off these materials, but then we'll have a chance to return to them later, or if I still decide to use it for some other researchers' work. So if I'm going to share this data with anybody else, and then, of course, it will be probably necessary to add some more contextual information regarding this corpus. But now I think it's quite enough. And also, in this case, there is no risk that I will spend too much time on retrieving the necessary contextual information from some other files and then look at the text in other files, so it may make the whole process longer and just more daunting. That's why I decided to keep these small things about the contextual information regarding each article in the files with the subcorpora themselves, like it is done here, for example. And then also speaking about the ways of preparing the corpora, I should mention that if you look at the original variants of these articles, which are published on their websites, I mean, initially they were published in the printed magazines, but then they were also republished on their websites, which made it easier for me to prepare the electronic corpora. So we will notice that usually there are some pictures, very often with captions, especially if these are graphs, schemes, but even usual photos, or in the electronic variants, some videos, and so on. And it refers to both magazines, at least to this or that extent. So that's why it was necessary to leave out all these captions, all these images, and just to put there only the text of the articles themselves. So now these things are already ready in general, and I've already experimented a bit with some corpus tools. So as I understand it by now, Encon could be quite useful for extracting the list of those similes, mostly using the concordance option in this tool. And for example, if you take like, because like is a component of many similes, we will notice that while some of these expressions maybe are similes, but many of them are not real similes. That's why it's clear that it will be necessary to make some manual analysis, taking out all those expressions which are not actual similes. For example, in this case, in the ecology of habitats like tide pools. So it's clear that there is nothing metaphorical in this. It's just the expression which makes the previous one more concrete, like habitats, which ones, for example, tide pools, and so on. And the same, of course, about any other structural kinds of similes, for example, with the use of as. But nevertheless, it's still much quicker and not so daunting as it could be with purely manual analysis without the use of any electronic tools. And here I can see the whole list of such expressions, so it makes the whole picture much more illustrative and much clearer from the very beginning. And even from some of these examples, we can notice that similes may play a very different function in different situations. So for example, if you look at this example, two hydrophones that look like eyes sticking out below, it's clear that the author resorts to this simile like eyes sticking out below to illustrate the meaning of this more scientific concept, hydrophones. Or at the same time, if you look, for example, at this one, with something like a very sophisticated ceramic organized into and so on. So we can see this evaluative adjective sophisticated. So it's clear that this simile conveys some evaluations. And of course, there are many other examples which are relevant to this. For instance, in this case, they film like cucumbers, so it also makes it clearer to the readers what this characteristic of some other organisms, in this case, for example, about sea stars, can be about. And the same also we can do, for example, with as. And then we will also notice that there are some interesting examples. For instance, if you look here, we will see this one, they use their light as a kind of burglar alarm. So seems to be quite metaphoric-like. And also, of course, if we need it, we can see the actual context of their use, which is very convenient about this project. And perhaps I will also still use the AVM corpus tool for some additional searches, for comparing some data between these two tools. Finally, maybe also for inferring some statistics parameters, especially I think descriptive statistics, counting the normalized frequency of using these expressions in these two varieties of popular science articles from two different magazines. So it's not so possible, maybe not so easy to do in ENCONC, or not so reliable in some cases, but his, as we've discussed, is always possible to go to the auto code and, for example, create some rules here, or to statistics and the different kinds of this, for example, general statistics, feature coding, and so on. So I think that this makes my descriptive statistics calculations easy and more reliable as well. That's why it's how I see my work on this project during next few days, I think so. Thanks.